my friends, let's do this. David Parsons here. This is Nostalgia Trap. How are ya? I hope you're doing well. It is almost Thanksgiving 2023. And you know what that means? Well, maybe you know what that means. I don't know what that means. It means a lot of nostalgia, honestly. A lot of dark, nostalgic energy. I feel like the holidays between Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's produces enough deep nostalgic energy to drive us throughout the entire year. And you can almost see that by the time you get to July, people are starting to put up Christmas trees. They need another shot of it. I always posted this YouTube video on my MySpace and Facebook for years and years and years. Justin Silverman, if you're out there, you're the only one that remembers. I remember you used to always celebrate when I posted this video. But every Thanksgiving, I would post this Gus Van Sant directed, I guess it's kind of a music video. It's William S. Burroughs in the 90s at some point, reading his Thanksgiving prayer. I'm not going to post it or read it here. You can go check it out. Maybe I'll post it in the episode description. If you haven't seen it, I like kind of checking in with that William S. Burroughs video every Thanksgiving because it reminds me of, I don't know, some sort of like bitter, acid, violent take on American history that's always been a part of me and always served me well, I think, in sort of remembering what it's all about, and sort of the nightmare that is just underneath the surface of American life. You know, I don't mean to be pessimistic about it all, but that's part of what we do on this show, I think, is sort of disrupt the often optimistic march of even the left. And I think that's something we're getting into in this conversation today with Anthony Galluzzo, which we'll get to in a moment. Why do we need let someone else be the optimist? Let someone else be the hopeful person. I want to share a couple things on Thanksgiving as we think about where we're at, because it's a pretty bitter fucking moment, honestly, to be an American once again, as we watch what it means to be part of an empire that allows and supports genocidal violence around the globe. And, the Israel-Gaza thing, I don't think I really want to get into that right now because you can find a million takes on that. What take is there, honestly, other than what the fuck, right? Like, how is this a part of our reality? And yet, if you listen to Nostalgia Trap, this is sort of like the architecture of our reality. It shouldn't be surprising. I think that maybe the social media element of the fact that we're watching the genocide live streamed in glorious HD adds a little something to the mix, for sure. But I wanted to share something from our good friend Justin Rogers Cooper before we get started here, because Justin he sent me and Andrew a text this morning that it kind of reminded me of the Thanksgiving prayer in a way. It was kind of like just a really biting summary of the moment that we're occupying right now. And Justin was reacting in particular to a story that Andrew shared with us about, it was in the Wall Street Journal recently, about a bunch of young 11, 12-year-old boys who became subjected to an online scam that drew them into sharing nude pictures of themselves. And there are more than something like 12 of these boys have committed suicide as a result of this scam. And that's just one of many sort of nightmarish TikTok, AI, sort of Black Mirror bullshit that are becoming, I think, more and more a part of our reality. You can just lose people into the internet. And that's something that Justin was reacting to in this text he sent us that I think is sort of like the Thanksgiving prayer. So here is Justin Rogers Cooper sending us a little vision of what Silicon Valley is doing to us. Silicon Valley is part of a global capitalist class that is essentially leading the planet into the techno future they want. It's all Tony Stark figures from here, aligned with military states, petrodollars, racing against climate change. You have left movement cultures that have adapted to TikTok, an insane product. Shadow state mafias feeding surplus populations the strongest drugs ever invented and killing 100,000 annually in just the United States. And worse inequality than in 1877, only buttressed by the thinnest of welfare systems. Houses unaffordable, but 72-inch TVs for $200. Instantaneous global influence for all if you can say the craziest thing. Instant guns if you want, but no house. Easier for a 30-year-old to shoot up a mall than buy a home. We're promised by these people that they will save the world, even though half of us don't believe the world is dying. We are in the dystopia. So thank you, Justin, for sending us those inspiring words. When you put it that way, I think when you sort of like take stock of where we're at, to me, there's something really, really intense about watching what's happening in Israel and Gaza kind of unfurled into the world of like the TikTok left and the sort of like Elon Musk Nazi right. It's a fucked up moment, and I think technology is leading the way in a lot of ways. And I think as we plunge into possible world wars, we can expect AI and drone warfare to be dominant features of that future. So all of that's really fun to think about, and I think it kind of I think it links up with my guest today, Anthony Galluzzo, someone who was on the show many years ago when we were both sort of emerging out of and I think outcasts from in some ways the sort of like Brooklyn left in 2016. I know that sounds like an eternity ago, but like in 2016 there was this sort of like socialist, dirtbag, Brooklyn podcast moment. And Nostalgia Trap had been around for a bit at that moment, but, along with the Bernie Sanders 2016 run, there was a lot of attention and a lot of energy headed towards sort of like this millennial socialism. So all of these years later, it feels like Trump, in many ways, sort of came and sort of shattered any illusion that there was a coherent left at all. But I think everyone would agree we're in a different moment than the sort of Bernie Sanders, the high moment of Bernie Sanders in 2016. So me and Anthony, I think, we occupy a little bit of a sort of like an odd part of whatever that is left of that left. And I think a part of that goes to our visions of the future and our visions of technology. And I think that's a part of what Anthony is identifying in his new book, which I want to say the name of before we even get started. It's called Against the Vortex, Zardoz and Degrowth Utopias in the 70s and Today. And I'm so glad that Anthony finally wrote about this movie, because as we get into in this conversation, I've been watching Anthony post about this movie for, honestly, a couple years. It's a weird 1970s sci-fi cult movie starring Sean Connery. We'll tell you all about what the movie is in this conversation. But I just wanted to say at the outset here that I think what Anthony has done is sort of given us a history and a sort of legacy, not just of the movie, but of the moment that it emerged from. In particular, this sort of like post-60s radical moment in the 70s when people were going into communes and building utopias and sort of, I think, expressing a lot of like environmental ideas and ideas about humanity's place in relationship to the earth and climate change and all of that. So all these years later, you have a left that I think is paralyzed in part by ideas of growth and infinite growth and technology. You have that sort of like fully automated luxury communism fantasy that I think a lot of people on the left sort of embrace. And Anthony gives us a different vision, a different set of ideas coming from people that were really sharp and I think lost to history in many ways in the 1970s. So this movie Zardoz is a total mindfuck, weird movie, and it connects to all of that weird utopic stuff. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. We're sort of, I think, reflecting on what is the left in this moment, and I think there are a lot of answers to that, and I wonder what yours are too. Go check out the Nostalgia Trap Patreon page. It's cool because you don't even have to pay for it anymore now. I mean, I appreciate it if you subscribe, and believe me, I want you to subscribe. But if you want to check out our stuff for free, you can sign up for a 7-day free trial and look at all of our massive library of bonus episodes and video lectures and little documentaries we've made. Lots of really cool stuff on there. I'm very proud of the the big Nostalgia Trap Patreon library. And I appreciate everybody who pays for it every month to keep everything going and keep this project alive. So thanks so much. Hope you have a happy Thanksgiving and enjoy this conversation. Here is me talking with Anthony Galluzzo. Anthony Galluzzo, good to see you, man. You were one of the, I think you were one of the first guests on Nostalgia Trap many moons ago. But good to see you.
It's my old apartment.
It was in Williamsburg, right?
Yeah, I was there for 10 years. He
Yeah.
finally got me out over the, during the pandemic. But
That's when I used to do interviews face to face and actually be in the same physical space with the people I was talking to. And that I don't. Yeah.
We were
I think.
drinking, right?
Yeah, drinking, smoking, all that kind of shit. It was a kind of different podcast, honestly. I got into during pandemic, I think, and after moving to California, just like Zooming all the time, which really opened up the podcast because I could literally just talk to anyone. I didn't have to like carry heavy equipment around the city or wherever I'm going. So
Is
I
the
don't know.
podcast doing well? I mean, I don't really listen to podcasts as much as other people. Like usually when I have to do like long drives, but how is
It's
it? Do you have like a
It's hard to say. I think people are still listening to the show and enjoy it, and honestly, I still enjoy making it. So that's all that matters to me. Is I'm going to put it out there. I always conceived of this as like, and this is weird because I kind of started before the podcast, revolution. I just started as kind of like I don't know, almost like a radio show that you put in a time capsule, and the future will listen to it. But at some point, there started to be like a podcast economy, as you
well these
know.
like Chapo Trap House and Red Scare and all that. Those people don't those people make enormous amounts of money? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, I think they're in some ways the sort of older generation because the podcast got discovered by everybody. I mean, like Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen are doing podcasts. Like the fact that like podcasts went from the kind of basement ham radio type guy to like the biggest celebrities want to have a podcast because it's a prop for their brand and a prop for
Yeah.
advertising. Sort of amazing. I mean, it happened really quickly. Yeah.
Well, I guess it fills the radio niche. Although I still don't understand how these people. I guess they're subscription services. I mean, that's it. I mean, I don't understand like influencers and people make money. It's kind of that stuff is vile to me, at least. But
Yeah, and what's really weird is like I don't know, you see all this stuff on like Instagram or Facebook, whatever, people that have like millions of followers, and it's sort of okay, how is that translated into money? I think honestly, like platforms like Netflix that's why there was a Hollywood strike. That's why they're like figuring out that like streaming doesn't make money. Like we used to buy albums, dude. We used to like go and have to take $15 to a store to buy an album. And like now I can just have any album for free. That doesn't seem like a good like deal for anybody, honestly.
well, now you have to subscribe to everything, right? It's not like you don't really own anything. It's like
No, it's all in the crystal. And that's why I wanted to talk with you today, Anthony, honestly, because you have a book out that I think would be of interest to Nostalgia Trap listeners wherever they are in space, in time. Because this book is a mindfuck, honestly, and it's attached to a mindfuck of a movie that is honestly something that I had paid little attention to, and I wonder, it's kind of a cult film. It's called Zardoz. And I want to say the name of your book as well. It's called Against the Vortex, Zardoz and Degrowth Utopias in the 70s and Today. And let me just before we get into it, let me just set it up for people. Zardoz is a film that came out in 1974. It's a sci-fi fantasy film written, produced, directed by John Boorman, who also made like Deliverance and a few other big Hollywood movies. I think he made the weird sequel to The Exorcist. But this movie is like stars Sean Connery, who's basically wearing like a bikini the whole time, and it's got like this bizarre plot that is actually, as I watched it, I was like, this is so perfect for Anthony Galluzzo. It so makes sense that you would like locate this film as a sort of important marker of a number of different trends that obsess you.
It was hard to summarize that plot, by the way. Like because they asked me to do that. They're like, "Oh, you have to summarize the plot because you can't assume that people really know the movie or know it well." And I don't know. It was in some ways like it was more difficult to summarize the plot than it was to kind of analyze the movie or make an argument. So I don't
That's
know.
part of why I'm not a big fantasy guy, honestly, because the plots are so convoluted and insane and so like specific that I sort of like lose track of what everyone is. I mean, it's like watching Dune or something. And I think it fits in there a little bit, honestly.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I don't think I mentioned Dune in the book, but Dune obviously was one, and I don't know. I mean, Borman, as far as I recall, doesn't mention Dune, but it seems like it must have been an influence, right?
I was thinking of a lot of other movies, honestly, while I was watching Zardoz last night. And I recommend you can find it on Amazon. I rented it for like $3 or $4. You can find it, even though it's a cult film. And God, it's where do we even begin with the plot? Because it sort of reminded me of The Matrix a little bit, in just the sense of like there's this vision of a future where people have been like reduced to this sort of like they're slaves essentially to a techno elite. Where
They
does
aren't aware of it. They aren't aware of it,
That's right.
right? Like,
So okay, why don't we start with this? Why would you write a book about Zardoz?
oh,
That's my NPR question.
I don't know. I've always the movie has always sort of fascinated me, and I mean, actually, the plot. Like I don't know. I think maybe I first saw the movie when I was in high school. I think I probably saw it with this high school friend of mine, this guy Chris Ketchum, who's actually this kind of radical environmental writer now. I might have been tripping on something. It really lends itself to that. It's very much like a product of like, psychedelic late 60s,
Totally.
70s. And the images just the images just stuck in my mind. So I mean, and it's just this very I don't know, dissonant combination of like ridiculous and sublime images with it has these camp elements. I mean, obviously like Connery, who's like this. I guess this is the first major movie, at least, that he did after James Bond, and he's there like kind of hairy, and at that point like entering into middle age in a red leather thong, and then there's this floating stone head, and then
Love the floating stone head.
and then there's just this bizarre sort of futuristic oasis, but the people who run this technological utopia slash or dystopia, the Vortex, are dressed in this kind of pre-Raphaelite slash late 60s ladies of the canyon
Yeah.
sort of garb. So and then so those images always stay in my mind. And then the movie has had an afterlife, in the era of the internet. It's the stuff of many memes, right? I mean, particularly the Connery's outfit, and then just going back to it and revisiting it. I mean, it is a sort of fascinating artifact of the time. I mean, I don't know. I kind of think about it in relationship to these other very sort of strange movies, these visionary sort of phantasmagoria like Jodorowsky films,
Yep.
like a Topo, or I mean, in an international context, I mean, there's some, I think, overlap. I mean, I suppose Tarkovsky is more, unequivally
It
high art.
reminded me of Weekend, honestly, the Godard film too. Like
Yeah,
it had elements of that where it's just sort of like this really I don't know, really acid satire of
yeah.
capitalist culture, and I mean that acid in both ways, I guess, in this like biting way, but also psychedelic way. It's it felt in a sense like a sledgehammer in some ways, like a real heavy-handed metaphor for what the world is like at that moment.
And people don't know how to take it now as a result, I think, right? Because a lot of it is satirical, and a lot of it, I think, is, I mean, it's, you're describing it as fantasy, but it's technically a science fiction film that's set in the far future. But it's very much like aimed at, it's very much also a satire of a certain kind of high modernist science fiction film, sort of pushing against that. I mean, I think um, Borman was engaging with 2001.
Hmm.
And he actually used his photographer, cinematographer, worked on 2001. And I think he's sort of parodying a lot of sci-fi tropes, post-war sci-fi tropes in particular. And so I don't know. I mean, it's a kind of a strange movie of ideas, and sometimes it's overwrought as a result. But I don't know. And then I it does overlap with some of my more recent concerns.
Yeah,
And
let's get to the more recent concerns, because I think that's what really is the key to understanding why this movie sort of persists as a as an artifact that makes sense in some ways. Because watching it last night, I was thinking, oh, okay, like this is like this sort of faith in technology culture, and the people who live in the vortex have sort of gone all the way into the Elon Musk vision of like accelerating into I don't know, fully automated luxury communism. And I think Musk was tweeting a couple weeks ago about how we're gonna have a world with no jobs anymore very soon, and that sort of thing. And you're sort of like, well, how does anyone how are we conceiving what the world will be like, without jobs? Because capitalism has sort of set up a system in which jobs are the only way that people survive, and it's unclear how that transition would take place. I mean, in Musk's mind, I can't help but think that it would resemble something along the lines of what we see in Zardoz, which is like the vortex and this sort of like techno elite who get to live forever. And it's what's crazy about Zardoz is like that vision is given a sort of like horrific edge, right?
yeah, I mean, I guess, like, I mean, just to explain to people who don't know the movie, right? Like, when the movie opens, it seems like it's in some kind of primeval or Stone Age past, right? You have these people who are, arrayed in thongs, and you think, oh, this is like some like kind of campy prehistoric past, and then there's this sort of floating stone head, and famously or infamously, the stone head speaks to these men arrayed in these bizarre outfits, and
Let's read. Let me read what it says, because it's like key to the tone, I think, of the whole movie. And it's like right at the beginning. These barbarian people are like stopping on their horses, and they're all sort of surrendering to this floating stone head in the sky. And the stone head sort of pronounces his instructions, and it says the following: "The gun is good. The penis is evil. The penis shoots seeds and makes new life to poison the earth with a plague of men, as once it was. But the gun shoots death and purifies the earth of the filth of the brutals. Go forth and kill. Zardoz has spoken." And then in the movie, the stone mouth like just shoots out all these guns, like just
Yeah.
thousands of guns and ammo fall out. And the people that are below in this kind of primeval landscape grab the guns and immediately start killing people. It's quite a vision. It's quite a start for a movie, honestly.
Yeah, it's I mean, you find out, like, the people that Zardoz, this god, is fact, and it's like a stone bearded god that, I mean, it's partly designed to resemble I mean, I think I talk about this in the book a little bit, like William Blake's kind of horrific satirical depiction of the Old Testament God, Nobo Daddy, right? And so these are the exterminators, and they essentially go and they rape and they kill. I mean, it's pretty horrific. What's left of the human population who are described as brutals. They've been brutalized, right?
Mhm.
The leader of this particular group of exterminators is a guy named Zed, who played by Sean Connery. And what happens is that we find out later on he's sort of suspicious of the god, and he manages to the Zardoz ejects guns, but they also offer him tribute in the form of wheat. And Zed slips in to Zardoz, and he at that point, he doesn't really know what's going on initially. He's like, "What the hell?" But it's a ship,
Mhm.
and it's piloted by this figure who opens the movie, who is a kind of like it's a
Hard
kind
to
of
describe that guy, like a weird charlatan.
Frayne. He's a wizard. I
Hmm.
mean, Zardoz is a play on the Wizard of Oz,
Right.
right? So and the Zed kills this figure, supposedly kills him. He comes back, and but at that point, Zed doesn't know how to pilot this thing, and it goes down in this like oasis that seems like the Garden of Eden. And what we learn, what Zed learns, is that in fact all of this, the god, this whole situation is it's a lot, it's a setup. The earth, this is actually set in a kind of a post-apocalyptic future. So the earth has been devastated. It's unclear if you read Borman wrote a book, like a novelization of the movie, which is actually kind of a fascinating kind of document. And I use that a lot in the book. Like I use it, actually look at that because you get a lot of backstory. It's a combination of maybe thermonuclear warfare and environmental devastation. So the human beings who are sort of left on this devastated earth are mutated, the brutals. But I mean, you do have this kind of techno elite working behind the scenes, and it is. I mean, this is a movie that comes out in the early '70s against the background of Paul Ehrlich and the population bomb and the
Yeah.
fears of like an overpopulation panic. So I mean, they're kind of a Malthusian elite. Like they're using these mechanical gods, and they're using the exterminators, essentially to control what's left of the human population. At one point, they have the human population, the brutals, growing wheat to feed this growing population within the vortex of these Eternals who are becoming catatonic. So, I mean, the other thing is like this technological elite, they're immortal. They call themselves the Eternals.
And it's
Um,
grim. Like they're discovering. I guess part of the engine of the plot is that some of them are discovering that like immortality sucks, and
well,
that
yeah.
their lives are empty and boring.
I mean, it's not their immortality isn't that they don't like their body. They don't have immortal bodies, right? I mean, the thing that should be said about this, and this is why I think it's interesting in our context, because Borman does seem to predict a lot of these sort of Silicon Valley fantasies. Is that the vortex, and it seems like there are other vortexes as well, is under the control of this AI supercomputer called the Tabernacle. So the genetic codes of all of the Eternals are contained within the supercomputer. So what happens is that these people, their bodies start to grow old, and then the supercomputer grows a new body for them. I mean, one of the figure Frayne, who is supposedly or apparently is killed in the beginning. He comes back because the supercomputer regrows a body for him, and
It's
there's that insane.
terrible. Yeah.
Remember when Zed is sort of taken to that kind of a laboratory exhibition space, and you see those bodies growing, and
Unbelievable, dude. Those visions are crazy, and it's like a,
yeah.
it's yeah, no,
So
it's like
it's the singularity. It is. I mean, Borman in 1974. He made the film in '73, so the early '70s is sort of looking forward to these Silicon Valley fantasies of sort of a post singularity technological elite, but and he's against the background of planetary ecological devastation. So
Right.
it's
I
a
mean, it's a
long
retreat
way.
away from that. And it's that image of the like that dome of bodies that are sort of like regenerating around them. That I was
Yeah,
thinking like it's like beyond panopticon. It's like a pan bodycon. You know what I mean? It's like every human being is sort of like surrounding them, and all that all these effects were done physically. Like this is before any sort of digital effects. So I thought some of this stuff, the film looks more expensive than it is. Honestly, it's like a really trippy looking movie.
yeah, it's a fairly low budget film. I don't know, a
I don't know
few
how
million
this.
dollars.
I honestly don't know how movies like this got made, but part of it is that's the delight of '70s movies is that people paid for all sorts of wild projects like this.
But yeah, I can't like the I'm why am I mean, if you have the book in front of you, I'm blanking on his name, but the director of photography.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was all he did it all. It's camera tricks. There's a scene where Zed effectively hooks up with these dissident Eternals who want to overturn the vortex, and it turns out they actually engineered Zed, right? But
That's right.
they decide to implant all of this knowledge, all of the knowledge of humanity in him. It's an insane scene where he's having sex
Yeah.
with these women Eternals, like very like kind of gratuitous 70s, but then they're also penetrating him with knowledge. And what Borman does is actually just sort of projects. He projected all of these images, these sort of civil images of civilizational development onto the bodies of Connery and these various um eternal women as they were having. It's very bizarre, that
Yeah,
scene, but
I feel like
it's
they
just
were doing that stuff in a lot of psychedelic movies, that sort of like projection of images onto bodies and nude bodies and stuff like that. It feels it feels even like the acid trip sequence at the end of Easy Rider. It
yeah,
feels
yeah,
like,
yeah.
a lot of that kind of stuff. And I
Or the
mean,
scene in Midnight Cowboy
right.
where they go to the party at the factory.
Oh God,
um
that movie fucked me up. I saw it too young.
so,
Um, I want to talk about the degrowth part of it and the sort of like the population bomb part of this, because really what you're situating Zardoz in is this historic moment that we've talked about a lot on the show, this sort of like hippie commune era in the 1970s when it seems like a lot of younger people in the United States and Europe sort of figured out that they'd come to the end of their revolution and that they were going to sort of escape into the communes and live the way they want to live. And it's sort of always, I think, always presented within the larger story, the counterculture. You talk about William Blake. It's like William Blake to Walt Whitman to Allen Ginsberg, and that sort of continuity of influences of like kind of back to nature type stuff. And
yeah,
and this movie is sort of taking that on in a really interesting way, because it's like the people that do that are escaping into their sort of like fantasy are also the people that are sort of the elites. And it seems like an intersection of like, I don't know, an intersection of like left influence counterculture and environmentalism, and then the sort of like almost like an authoritarian fascism.
I try to
Yeah,
complicate the story of I mean, it just seems like like either you have these sort of dominant narratives now, I mean, on the left, right? Like, that I mean, I guess for the most part there's just a largely sort of negative perspective, like on the 60s, right? The 60s and 70s and the counterculture on the part of this like newest left, associated with our favorite Jacobin magazine. And
yeah, yeah.
I think one of the things I'm trying to sort of take on this sort of this
Yeah, I mean,
mono.
it's the same. It's the old left, new left, right? I mean, it's the same.
Yeah,
It's the same thing from the '60s itself, right? It's kind of like the Michael Harrington socialist. Let's get back to the factory kind of thing.
yeah, yeah.
And then yeah, And then
But
the
you know,
hippies.
I don't think there was a monolithic counterculture. Obviously, I think that there were. I mean, this seems like an obvious point to make, but it doesn't get made, right? I mean, I think that it was sort of very variegated, and you had different antagonistic camps. And I think I mean, was it Fred Turner is the one who wrote From Counterculture to Cyberculture, right? And he, I mean, this is a story that gets told a lot. It focuses on the figures like Stuart Brand, who was the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog, which is a kind of a proto analog internet. He was involved with one version of the Back to the Land movement, like this movement of communal living, mostly situated in Northern California in the late 60s and the 70s. But I mean, it's strange, it's counterintuitive, because I mean, Brand from the very beginning, I mean, he was anticipating the internet. I mean, this was happening concurrently with, I guess, the beginnings of the internet, which was a kind of a military technology in the form of DARPANET. But he was sort of looking forward to that. And, he initially thought that communal living was the best form of social organization for this new sort of techno communications revolution that was coming. And he also ultimately saw it as a kind of a prototype form of social organization for for space exploration.
Yeah,
So
right.
I mean, you had a bunch of these hippies, who were, they were techno utopians. A lot of the people who were living in the communes were techno utopians, and there's a direct connection to Borman and Zardoz. So Zardoz, even though we just described this really sort of elaborate and bizarre movie that's set, was it 2293, I think.
Yeah.
But that when Borman originally conceived of the movie, it was supposed to be set a few years in the future, like in the late 70s. And it was originally about, I guess, a hippie girl who goes missing.
Mm.
And she ends up in one of the communes in Northern California. And I don't know, there's an investigator. I believe there was an investigator who was pursuing her, and Borman, as research for the film, went to the communes and spent some time there, sort of ethnographic exercise. And he had a very strange response to it, as opposed to, oh, dirty hippies, primitivists. He's like, there's something sterile about it, particularly the ones that had more sort of dogmatic lines. And he actually saw a lot of these people as budding technocrats, right? And so, I mean, he kind of had this insight at this moment that later is, ratified by subsequent history, because I mean,
that's like he sees neoliberalism coming. Like,
yeah,
that's crazy. And like, there's so many movies
failed. They failed. But like, a lot of these people then went on to, they were involved in like the .com.
Right.
I mean, in other words, there's a direct line between one iteration of the counterculture and what then becomes sort of cyberculture, in the 90s and onward. And, people have talked about that genealogy.
Yeah.
Of
I mean, Terrence McKenna is a figure that I've probably brought up on the show many times, in part because I encountered that sort of intersection of counterculture and cyberculture in the 90s through figures like that, like in rave culture and all that. And it's to me, like, looking back at it, at the time I just thought, oh, this is the continuation of the 60s, sort of. Like, I was sort of attracted to a lot of that lingo, in part because it was just like, oh, this is where, like, the revolution of the 60s continues on the internet somehow.
Well, I mean, it hasn't worked out like that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, though. I mean,
it hasn't worked out. Well, I don't know. Has it? Because it's like, what's the revolution of the 60s about? Like, that's part of what Zardoz does for us, I think.
But here's all right. Here's the thing, though. I mean, first of all, I mean, you asked me about like my more recent personal states. Sort of like, you remember I was going. I mean, several years ago when I kind of broke from whatever you want to call them. I mean, that seems like a spent project now as well, but like the kind of new, so Bernie Crat
Oh
kind
yeah,
of
all that's
social,
over, dude. That seems so old to me now.
but I mean, these guys, yeah, I mean, they're like
You know what, dude? You know why
wait, wait,
their vision lost, dude. And like once Bernie was gone, that was it. But like to me, like that, all of that, so much of that energy, it's like it's on the right, and it's on the right in a much more powerful way. And like you know, a lot of people maybe don't know this, but like when Joe Rogan, like who I feel is a bridge figure between this counter cyber culture and like bro culture and into like the sort of like fascist Proud Boy shit. There, that's the vision that won. And like Joe Rogan, when he first started out, before when he started out as a podcaster, one of the reasons he became very popular is because of a clip of him appearing on another podcast before he started his own. And what was he talking about? It was this clip that went viral, and it's like Joe Rogan, this comedian, he said this shit that was so powerful. And I remember because I had the clip on my computer. It was him talking about taking DMT and like doing a psychedelic drug. And like while he was flying into Los Angeles, and this is what he wasn't on DMT on the plane, but he was talking about this in the clip. But he's like, I realized on DMT the same thing that I realized when I'm flying into LA. When you see the brown spot on the map that is Los Angeles, that human beings are a virus. And that human beings are just like a bug on the earth that destroy the planet. And I thought to myself, God, that vision is there in Zardoz, right? Like it's
yeah.
the very beginning, that kind of like seeing human beings as a plague. And I'm like, not everybody takes psychedelic drugs and sees that, Joe. It takes a certain kind of perspective, and it seems like that perspective is there on the left and right, and maybe merging after the 1970s in a weird way.
But I mean, I guess my own like my own sort of person. Well, I mean, I had a falling out with these people because they actually all have terrible ecological politics, right? They're like these, I mean, they effectively have like these kind of techno-libertarian ecological politics. They hate the natural world. They're all about high technology. And when I started to, push against that and question that, what I was called a Malthusian or a neo-Malthusian.
Go back
And
to Burning Man, which is kind of ironic
but
too.
no, but
Yeah.
wait though, but like that, like the Malthusianism or neo-Malthusianism was associated with kind of a romantic primitivism, etc. But it's ill-informed, this perspective, right? I mean there were these sort of hippie modernists, but they were great. And many of them had this sort of Malthusian perspective, but they were also great advocates for technology. Right. I mean, in other words, this is something like a lot of these like recent degrowth thinkers have pointed out, like Georgios Kallis in this book Limits. He's like, there's this sort of distorted idea of both Thomas Malthus. I mean, that's where Malthusianism comes from. He's this late 18th century, early 19th century parson who came, who formulated this idea that human population growth, human population grows exponentially, whereas agricultural productivity, grows arithmetically, and we always sort of outstrip like resource use, which leads to, but he wasn't anti, but his whole one of his whole points, if you actually read him, is that this is actually a positive spur for innovation,
Yeah.
right? It's exactly that kind of pressure that drives sort of technological innovation as human beings strive to sort of surmount those resource limits. So it becomes a motor of the progress, that a lot of these, a lot of these, these so-called new progressives champion. So a lot of it is like, a lot is sort of like, I looked at this intellectual history, and a lot of it's wrong headed. I mean, the neo Malthusians, these sort of, people like Ehrlich and Garrett Harding. I mean, they were sort of global technocrats who sort of imagined a sort of a rational sort of population and resource management regime. I mean, they were imagining something like a kind of a bio, some kind of global biopolitical regime. They weren't anti-technology. And I mean, I think, there's a relationship, I think, between these sort of neo-Malthusians of the 1970s and, the long-termists of today.
What do you mean by
You know,
long-termists?
well, about long-termism. These like, I mean, that guy Sam Bankman-Fried claimed to be a long-termist, right? Like, oh well, they're these utilitarians. We have to do these terrible things right now. Invest in private equity to make enough money so we can invest. So we can save humanity in the long run. This kind of thing, like it's kind of means ends
Right.
thinking. So I mean, technocratic thinking, utilitarian thinking. You know, I mean, you see it today. You see it amongst these Silicon Valley tech gurus. You also see it like on the so-called socialist left, because all of these people have a hard on for technology. So I mean, they're always screaming about Malthusians, but in many ways they are actually uh, the heirs of Malthus, and particularly the neo-Malthusians of the 60s and the 70s, even though they don't want to, they would never want to hear that. Yeah. The second thing though is, is like, I don't think that was the counterculture in its entirety. I think
Right.
that and that's another thing I'm trying to underline. I think that was, I mean, there was a hippie modernism, but one of the things that I try to excavate in the book are these other strands of the counterculture that were very much pushing against that. So I come up with this term, critical Aquarianism, which
I
is
love that.
um, and I mean, I mean, encompasses thinkers like, Ivan Illich, right? I talk a bit about him. I mean, I talk about people like Norman O'Brown. I talk about, I mean, there was this sort of death acceptance movement, more in the 70s, like people like Ernest Becker, The Denial of Death.
Yeah.
I mean, these are people who, I mean, actually question the legacy of this, expansionist modernity, opted for what they called convivial technology, as opposed to just this Promethean vision of technological growth for technological growth's sake. So, I mean, you might say like, well, isn't that, I mean, that's another discourse of limits, like the Malthusian one. But I think it's different. It's a sort of it's a qualitative discourse
This is all
of limits.
reminding me of like I'm trying to envision the sort of like techno utopian left, like what, and it feels like the train is always a kind of fetish object for that,
Yeah.
for that group. Like, we need more trains. And I get that. Like, in part I get like the car as like a sort of like symbol of a direction in industrial capitalism that sort of doomed us in a million different ways. But I don't necessarily see the train as the sort of like response to that. What do you think of all that? Because it feels like that's sort of what you're talking about, is that vision that like we can somehow just rejigger the structures of what we've got, and sort of bring it back to the train. I'm always thinking about the train as like, I don't know, the 19th century story of the construction of the railroads in the United States is not a happy one, right? It's actually the story of the creation of modern capitalism,
Yeah.
and is really the story of conquest and manifest destiny and genocide, on top
This is
of all the structures of like accountants and managements and corporate capitalism that became the nightmare that we live in today. So to me, trains are not necessarily fetish objects, but at the same time, I kind of like, I understand the sort of like need to envision some other sort of mechanism. It's like technology is the only way we can envision a way out, which is sort of a trap, I guess.
Well, it's a problem that, I mean, it's part of at least the orthodox Marxist tradition, right? I mean, oh, well, there are relations and I mean, this is a very sort of simplistic, crude Marxism, but I mean, it's part of the history. I mean, there are forces and relations of production. If we can only liberate it's the problem isn't the factory. The problem isn't the complex technologies. It's the capitalist relations of production. So if we can, if we can seize, these means of production and just put them under, workers' control, reorganize them along socialist lines, we'd have the People's Republic of Walmart.
Right.
And and I think that's why, radical ecology is such a threat to these people, right?
Mm.
And I want to distinguish, radical ecology and the recognition of planetary boundaries from, the Malthusian focus on population as such. I mean, we can reject that. I mean, if there were, if there were 10 billion people on the earth, but they all, if we all, and we all lived like the Amish, it wouldn't be so much a problem. It's particularly patterns of production and consumption that are coming up against real biophysical limits, right? And so we're undercutting the biophysical basis of our own flourishing, and I don't think there's a technological way out of that.
Well,
And
I
we're
mean,
also,
look at China, right? I mean, I often hear a kind of broad, kind of tanky leftism that would like say that what China has done in the last decades of moving like a billion people, millions of people, hundreds of millions of people out of rural poverty and into an urban industrial life, that's like a project that's to be celebrated. And to me, I look at that and I'm like, that's Zardoz, right? Like to me, I'm like horrified by shit like that, and I don't want to live there. And that feels like something you're not supposed to really say on the left. You're supposed to admire the Chinese project, but to me, I don't. And I'm scared of it, honestly, like giant authoritarian projects that organize society that way. What do you think of all that? Because it seems like part of what we're dealing with is sort of like how you handle massive populations. And I don't know if like the solutions that the 60s kids came up with were any more sort of effective than anything else that sort of followed them, if that makes sense.
no, I mean, there's I mean, what passes for left, there's a fetish for centralization. There's a fetish for, yeah, like high modernist technology. I mean, it's strange. I mean, it's something I talk about in the book at length, but you talk about, I use this term hyper modernism, right? Because I mean, it seems as if with a lot of these, when we know we've encountered some of these. I mean, we see it in one form, in the form of people like Elon Musk and Thiel and Ray Kurzweil, but we also see it on the left, like this idea of kind of like, I mean, it's retro. These people who are all looking back to, Soviet era fantasies of space exploration and immortality, and
Yeah,
what happened to my
the
flying
grand
car,
project. Yeah,
the grand projects. Um, but it's taken on, and it always had this implicitly, but more and more it's taken on an explicitly religious cast, right? Like,
yeah,
oh, this is human destiny, right? Modernity is a stepping stone to the colonization of the stars. Is this sort of like hubristic fantasy? It's a kind of a substitute. Um, it's like substitute religiosity. So it's strange. On the one hand, there's a scientism, there's this sort of utilitarianism, right? There's this fixation on kind of a purely quantitative approach, uh, to human life and the management of human life. On the other hand, I mean, it seems to be underwritten by a religious vision of human destiny that, paradoxically, the endpoint of that would be the transcendence of the human. Like, there's this, I think Gunther Anders was this, he was once Hannah Arendt's husband. He's sort of a mid 20th century German thinker, coined this term Promethean shame, like human beings in the modern era in the West, develop something like an inferiority complex before their own products.
Yeah.
Because products are designed, I mean, products have a kind of virtual immortality, right? Like there's always a new model every year. Whereas human beings are sort of thrown into the world. We're born. We're animals. We've got these messy bodies. We get old and we die. So it's strange. I mean, so the idea, the modernist fantasy, or the hyper-modernist fantasy, is to somehow transcend that. And I mean, it's the old religious fantasy. It's like Gnostic Christianity in sort of technological and scientific dress. But I see so much of it now because the modernist dream is collapsing, I think, before the reality of ecological collapse. I don't think that means that we have to give up like the utopian impulse. I don't think that means we have to throw out things like socialism, but we have to sort of reconceptualize them. I mean, that's sort of like the other part of this book, and something that, I'm thinking about, how can we think something like utopia, or at least the utopian impulse, and limits, like biophysical limits, together. And I think for a lot of these people now who call themselves socialists and are always screaming about utopia, I mean, when they say utopia, what they mean is like religious transcendence. I mean, they might, a lot of them might start talking about, achieving a post-capitalist society, a classless society, abundance for all. But a lot of them always end up talking about like, transcending all limits, right? like colonizing Mars, or achieving immortality of a sort.
I don't, I mean, I don't.
So
I don't know
I
where
those two things.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about AI, right? Like, and to me, part of me is like, oh, okay, we're plunging into this like sort of future where the meaty human is going to be more and more devalued. I mean, Musk is just saying it, right? Like, we're just going to not have jobs anymore. What he really means is we're not going to have as many human beings. And that part of it. But the other part of it is like their technology it sucks. It like doesn't work. It didn't do anything. Like Tesla, for instance. Like who fucking cares? Like, you made an electric car. Why? Like why do electric cars matter? Like, I see like there's a very smug attitude about electric cars here in California. Like, I'll see a Tesla and like the license plate will be like LOL gas, or like, kind of making fun of people that use fossil fuels. Like, we've transcended that. And to me, I'm kind of like, yeah, but your car is still in that economy and made of materials that are mined from all sorts of conflict regions. It's a joke.
A false solution. It's a false solution. I mean, what? I mean, at the point of combustion, it's an improvement. But the energy comes from somewhere. And what about the steel? And what about the plastic? And what, we're going to replace the entirety of the fleet of cars?
We're gonna watch green capitalism happen, Anthony, and and honestly, I think, for the amount of time that I'll be alive, unless we do really achieve immortality, I'm gonna probably not see the full transition. But I can assume that we're gonna see a lot of wind and a lot of like solar.
But it's going to be enormously destructive. That's the point. The point is it's as destructive as.
It's a total fucking ripoff, and for a long time,
it's connected to the carbon economy. Like, actually, it's like, I mean, I
don't believe it. I don't believe that the system can be, and it sounds like you don't either, that this system can be run if you just switch out the energy source. For a long time, that was the left, dude. Like, the left for us was like, we got to get off fossil fuels. Once we take the oil out of the equation, then we're good, and we can have luxury automated communism running on some other I mean, often this is
All
the
right,
heart
all
of
right,
sci-fi, right?
but
Like
that's the
sci-fi is like
thing,
we're gonna
though.
find the jewel that is gonna be replace oil for us, the magical
You know,
jewel.
next generation nuclear reactors, right? And cold fusion. That's what Lee Phillips
Speaking of
is.
Jacobin,
It's like, it's like,
they're all about nuclear over there, I think.
of course, that keeps them up at night. But I mean, the thing is, yeah, Elon Musk and these people. I mean, we know what they are. Like, they're obviously he's an unapologetic and unhinged capitalist. But I mean, what's
And a
more
Nazi too.
what's more disturbing to me is that all these like leftist anti-capitalists, I mean they're essentially spouting the same thing except with Marx references,
Right.
right? I mean, they want this. I mean, it's like there's this sort of continuity of vision. And again, I think that goes back to the fact that both, because a lot of these people are hearkening back to Soviet, they've got this romanticized view of Soviet communism,
Yeah,
right?
they're
And
Leninists, right?
Leninists, or like soft Leninists, and the fact is that both 20th century state socialism, and this is related to at least the orthodox Marxist inheritance, and capitalism, I mean, they both, share some baseline assumptions, right? About, this idea of productivism,
Dude,
right? Like this
don't you consider that state capitalism? I mean, I know this will offend the guy that's wearing the hammer and sickle sweatshirt, but like the Soviet Union was state capitalism, and like to me, like that there's very little difference, and I know that like freaks people out to say, but if we're talking about it from the like ecological standpoint,
yeah. Well,
and
they have
even
a
the
terrible
human standpoint,
ecological life. But I mean, but just on a sort of like, it's just there's a kind of Marxist magical thinking, right? Like, oh well, you know, it's just, yeah, the fact, the natural world, it's just, it's like this social determinism all the way down, right? So there is no nature, right? The natural world is just a kind of a human artifact. Like a lot of this is the sort of thing that was pushed by these like 90s era like critical geographers, people whose work in other ways I admire, like people like Neil Smith, or like, oh, there is nature is a construct, social determination all the way down. What? So once we put the factory under the control of the workers, it will cease to pollute. It will cease to spew greenhouse gases. I mean, there's this strange kind. I mean, it's odd, right? There's
it
no
is odd.
acknowledgement.
It's also odd coming from people who sort of constantly like make fun of like the idea of neoliberal culture, where you say, "Oh, okay, well, we'll have a woman run the gas chamber, and that'll be better," And you're sort of like, but it's the same fucking logic, dude. Like, you can't inject some like quote unquote Marxism into an overall structure of industrial capitalism, and say that runs it better. To me, like it's the same.
No, and like if you have, and even if you have a you know a high industrial society that is worker run, you know I mean, that runs up against the same.
Have you seen the workers? I don't trust those fucking guys.
No, I mean, it's
I don't have a fetish. I don't have a fetish for workers or this like
the traditional industrial working class. Really, they're well known for their enlightened and benign views about ecology. But these
there's
people
no
are
monolithic counterculture. There's no monolithic working class either.
no, but there's no. These people are. They hate environmentalism. They hate nature. No, they do. The war on mosquitoes. I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about. I mean, they do, right? It's like this kind of like, and I'm not. I grew up in New York City. I'm like an urban person, right? But it's like, as I've gotten older, I recognize, like, a lot of these people are actually suburban and they moved to New York, but it's almost like they have this fetishized idea of a certain kind of urban existence that maybe they've gotten out of a Woody Allen movie, right? And they sort of position themselves against the natural world, which gets subsumed into the figure of the hippie.
Yep.
Right. And but what's been amusing to observe over the last, like, say, 6 or 7 years is that you can't deny the ecological crisis. So they all jumped on that bandwagon. Like, remember, like, remember when all those same people associated with Jacobin and Verso, they rebranded themselves eco-socialists. This happened about 20. These people want, uh, environmentalism was petty bourgeois. It was reactionary. It was, backward looking. And then around 2016, all these people started calling themselves eco-socialists, right? But then you looked at their programs, and it was the same program that they had before with the green veneer. Oh, their versions of the Green New Deal involve things like, geoengineering. Like, geoengineering, like, spraying sulfites into the sky, and essentially, transforming like weather patterns. Let's put the fact that this is purely speculative and it won't work aside. It's just completely, nuclear everything. I mean, in the more ridiculous iterations of this, like you mentioned, fully automated luxury communism, mining asteroids or terraforming other planets. I mean, again, it's like green cat. You talked about green capitalism. What is this? It's like this kind of, this like Prometheism socialism,
Yeah.
that's whose proponents have opportunistically adopted, these green. Oh, they're going to use the climate state of emergency to push through their fantastical agenda. We have to do it. And again, I mean, it just
It's
strikes me
not
because
progress though, and it seems like more and more people, especially with the internet, I feel more people than say 10 years ago would identify the internet as a toxic force on the planet, right? Like that, and that's to me that's pretty important. Like it's an important turn because you and I and everyone else have lived in this era where it was sort of taken for granted that like anything related to the internet, anything related to phones and communications was good. And if you said it was bad, you were some sort of like Luddite asshole that's sort of like standing in the way of humanity reaching its apotheosis. And now I think there's more and more people who are interested in analog culture. I
yeah,
mean,
no,
that's it's weird because that's going to be the counterculture is kind of like going back to like having a landline or
no,
like
I
that sort of
I
life.
I
Vinyl,
think
you know?
there's a contingent of like whatever, like Zoomers who are like, I have some students who they have flip phones, or
Oh
you
yeah,
know, I
dude.
mean,
Listen to this, dude. From Kim Stanley Robinson. Do you know
yeah,
that author? Like
yeah,
yeah, there was an interview with him like in Financial Times the other day, and he said uh he was talking about exactly this issue with SpaceX and Elon Musk, etc. And he said, disrupt, innovate, entrepreneur. These are all buzzwords out of a failed political economy that has wrecked things. I would rather go to hell than be called an innovator. And I thought that kind of keyed into a little what we're talking about is, and sort of like he's a popular writer. I know he's a socialist, but either way, he's sort of pointing the way to sort of a disruption of the disruptors, and a sort of you and I, fuck, like you and I were when we met, you and I were both sort of like, I mean, I think still are kind of like journeymen in the adjunct academic world, but like there was a period when I was in graduate school, probably in the 2010s, the Obama years, where I mean, it's when I was trained as a teacher, honestly. I was sold on the idea of digital education and
yeah.
MOOCs and all that shit. It seems like pandemic like came as a hammer and showed us that digital education fucking sucks and students hate it, faculty hate it, and in fact teachers hate it. I mean, everybody hates it. And it's not the future. But you and I were sold for a long time on digital technology and digital
Oh,
education as
I mean,
the thing.
early on. I mean, when I came out of graduate school, I had that first job at West Point, and I was very much. I mean, my thinking was, I had this sort of, whatever you want to call it, like kind of like soft trot phase, and I was online with a lot of this stuff. I mean, the sort of Promethean line
Dude, I
about
have a podcast for Christ's sake. You know what I mean?
technology,
I was
but
like,
also,
oh, this is a way to get my words out, to the people. Is I can now throw it online, and I'm still doing it. So, I mean, there's a
well,
dialectic at work here for sure.
out of necessity. But I mean, I don't. I mean, I think one of the things, one of the points I make in the book is that film is interesting to me because it kind of yokes together, a set of seemingly antithetical issues. I mean, it's a critique of sort of this Malthusian planetary management, right? Those are sort of false limits. It's artificial scarcity. At the same time, that I think that the film simultaneously recognizes there are real limits, right? And I think that all right. So that I think is that to me is like the necessary intellectual and political task, for any kind of quote unquote emancipatory project in the 21st century. We have to sort of differentiate between the given and the made, if that makes any sense, right? We have
Yeah,
to
right.
differentiate between the artificial forms of scarcity, the artificial scarcity produced by, capitalist economies, and and think about how we can get rid of that artificial scarcity and create a kind of abundance. At the same time, we have to recognize there are real hard and fast limits. I'm going to say it, natural limits. And this is a word that people are afraid of, right? And that any kind of alternative society that we might create would have to sort of grapple with that and accept that and organize itself around that. So, I mean, distinction between the given and the made. And then finally, I mean, the other issue I think that the film sort of grapples with, I mean, you mentioned, like, I mean, these people, the Eternals, are these sort of techno utopians. I mean, and they live forever and they hate it. Like
Well,
I mean, so
and
an increasing number of them are becoming catatonic, the apathetic,
I love
right?
that.
And so they're dropping into this state of just of idiocy, which kind of looks forward to the internet addled, a certain kind of Western internet addled subject of affluent subject of today, right? And I mean, a lot of these people want nothing so much as to die, right?
Yeah.
It turns out, one of the twists in the movies is that a couple of these Eternals have actually manufactured Zed to bring death, which is called the gift of death, to this kind of techno mausoleum that is the vortex, and not just death, right? I mean, they're not. I mean, to bring birth. This is a sexless society. Sex is like considered to be an atavism, right? And so, I mean, it ends with these people begging Zed to and these other exterminators who breach the vortex walls to kill them. Not all, and then
It's so
there's another,
insane, dude. It's like a mass shooting is happening at
but
at the end of this movie, and they're
lost,
begging, "Kill
right?
me, kill me." Yeah. Oh God.
But then others, like and this isn't as clear in the movie, but if you were to read the novelization, and one of the eternal leaders, May, like decides to go off. Like she's going to go off with a group of other women. They're all pregnant at that point, impregnated by Zed, and they're kind of try to live with the Brutals in the Outlands outside of the walls.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to bring some of their expertise to kind of inform. So they're founding a new community, right? So
Right.
I mean, there is a gesture toward another kind of utopian community, one that accepts the facts of birth, embodiment, and death, that will presumably incorporate some of the technological expertise, that we saw in the vortex, but it will be amongst, brutal kind, right? So I don't know. I think, these sort of, so I mean, this is something that I'm sort of gesturing to, right? The
Watch
utopia.
Zardoz if you haven't seen Zardoz, guys. It's a mind fuck. Have you seen this movie Born in Flames from the early
No.
'80s? if you wanted to watch Born in Flames, I'd love to talk about it with you on a podcast again, because we've done an episode on Born in Flames, but I could talk about that movie forever. It's sort of a feminist vision of Zardoz a little bit. It's a post socialist revolution in New York City. I think you'd be really interested in it. I think you would dig it.
Wait, I feel like I've heard about it. Who made the movie?
Lizzie Borden.
Yeah, I've heard about this movie. I've
Yeah,
heard about this movie.
you should check it out.
I've actually wanted to see it.
So yeah, watch it. I wonder what you think of this, and we can wrap up here. But this is what this movie made me think of, and I know this like sort of tracks with a lot of what you think of too. But like, is there pessimism ever for you, like a George Carlin type, like where you look at humanity and you sort of like think, well, yeah, okay, technically 10 billion people could be on the earth. There's no reason why, like you said, we could all like live like the Amish, but we're too stupid for that. We're imperfect. We're not. We're made of meat. We have sexual impulses. We're born and we die, and all those things influence religion and influence a kind of like imperfection that serves as a sort of barrier to us ever getting it together. And we're doomed to just kind of like consume the planet now, because whatever impulse of desires that capitalism kind of constrains and lets loose is a Pandora's box. We can't put it back in, and that's that. And we're just gonna have to watch this cycle. And that falls in line with that Joe Rogan shit, right? It's like human beings are just here to fucking eat and consume and exterminate, and that's it. And part of me, in my darkest moments, sees that, and it's just kind of like, well, how would we ever get it together?
Well, no, I think about that a lot, and I mean, I don't know. To bring it back to the film, I think that is maybe the perspective that you could associate with these exterminators in Zed, right? I mean, one of the points I make is I don't think, I mean, my reading the film, I don't, because a lot of feminist critics hated the film at the time, right? Because they thought it was somehow valorizing Zed as like the alternative to
the swarthy lover that brings orgasms and babies
yeah,
to the women.
And there's a strange end of the movie ends where Charlotte Rampling and Charlotte Rampling plays one of these eternal leaders, Consuela. They flee to, I guess it's actually like the Stone Head. It's like which has been it
looks like they live in a cave, honestly. It looks like they've gone back in time, which I guess is part of the primitivism.
It's actually supposedly the Stone Head, and there's this great scene at the end where it's like, it's just sort of, it's the only actually sort of montage in the film. The film, sort of refuses montage until the very end. It's like the only sort of cinematic realization of a progressive and teleological form narrative is, they're progressing through the stages of life. She's pregnant. They have a kid. The kid grows up. The kid disappears from the frame. They get older. They die. And then you have, these skeletal figures, and the camera pans up, and it looks like cave painting. So there's a suggestion that what was the future maybe was the primeval past.
Yeah.
But I mean, there were feminist critics at the time. People like Marcia Kinder was like, "Oh, this is just a valorization of the nuclear family and all that." And I just think that's and a valorization of Zed, and I think it's wrong. I mean, Zed is a dead end, literally. I mean, it's like he had a particular mission to perform, which is to destroy this sort of artificial society, and he performs that mission, and then he goes off. I mean, it's these other women, actually, and this happens off screen, who go off and found another society. But yeah, I mean, I would associate that with, it's about human beings are just these animals, and we should just sort of revel. I mean, we are animals, or these brutes, and we should just sort of revel in that. And I mean, I think there has to be a way of accepting. I mean, I guess that's the point. Like, I mean, imperfection, accepting our imperfections and accepting our animality. Human beings are actually much worse than non-human animals, if you want to think about it. Mm-hmm. Accepting those, imperfections and maintaining some kind of not utopian impulse. Like, can we, and I think part of the problem, in a society such as ours, like, I mean, we want to associate it with modernity or capitalist modernity. There's just this denial of that,
Yeah.
right? There's
Yeah.
like there's a denial of our animality, and there's a denial of death. Those things don't go away, though. If you want to put it in psychoanalytic terms, if you deny them, they become more powerful and they get sort of projected outward. So, I mean, a denial of our own finitude sort of manifests itself in this sort of distorted way as as this urge to kill, right? I mean, it's a way of mastering death, meeting it out. So I think that there's a relationship between, the typical modern denial of death, corporeality, animality, our imperfections, and these sort of these pathologies. I think capitalist modernity, partly.
Ernest Becker's book honestly blew my mind when I read it in
Yeah.
my early 20s. I was like, dude, this guy has the key. I had a friend, I remember at the time, my roommate, we would just yell denial of death at each other all the time because it sort of seemed to pop up. Once you read that book, it sort of pops up everywhere. You're sort of like, oh, that explains a lot.
It's a great
Is
book,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
it's like, and there were these like thinkers who were like, I mean, they were part of this like very expansively conceived kind of countercultural milieu. Like I mentioned, Illich, and I mean, they're very different though than the what these hippie modernists. So,
totally.
and I think a lot of those ideas were also inflecting like the cultural production of the time.
Right.
And I think that again, I think one of the things that I think we need to sort of go back and sort of examine these different strands. I think that like degrowth, what people are calling degrowth now, was first articulated back then, but it was articulated against neo-Malthusianism. Contrary to people, degrowth is neo-Malthusian. No, I think that I mean, I think a lot of the sort of ecological economics of the time were sort of articulated against that, because that was a very technocratic project, and it was tied to maintaining growth rates, and was tied to maintaining the Western standard of living. I mean, think about Garrett Hardin, right? And lifeboat ethics. How to maintain like
Mm-hmm.
high standards of living in the global north, against this nightmare of like the teeming masses, like out in places like India, right? And
Right.
I think that you get the science fictional visualization of that in Zardoz. He's sort of depicting like things like uneven ecological exchange between the global north, the vortex.
And it's so funny to think about because it's like people in industrial societies tend to be miserable and sort of wallow in their own misery, and then look to the so-called primitive societies, the third world, as sort of like fantasy projection spaces, or places where like the real people are. There's a sort of like longing for the meat of of that world, but like kind of in a kind of extractive cultural way, if that makes sense. The
Yeah, yeah,
idea
yeah.
of just sort of mining that primitivism in order to bring some sort of meaning to your otherwise like dreary industrial existence. Like I think that's part of why the techno utopianism never appeals to me, because I'm sort of like, we have a techno utopian society. That's what the Cold War sort of accelerated and brought to us in a much more pronounced way. And we were children of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. We live in techno utopian industrial society, and it fucking sucks, and we're alienated from it. And yes, like our basic needs might be met, some more than others, but for the most part, we're miserable creatures.
But
And
we
we,
didn't get the flying cars. It's not
that's right.
right. And
Yeah,
why aren't we like vacationing on Mars?
right. Well, that's Back to the Future, right? I mean, those 80s movies envision that. We don't really envision that anymore. Like movies now that envision the future are all dystopian, it seems like. That's
Yeah,
just
but
kind of
these people all fetishize this shit, right? Like, I mean, Musk on the right, and then pick your Jacobin person, right? They fantasize about this shit. I mean, I don't know, like Mars, it's just an abyss. It's sort of
yeah.
like, what was that submersible that went, that went down, that
Oh, and
exploded?
killed those people. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's effectively, it's just, I mean, that's the sort of Mars vision,
Mars is, I think, 65 degrees below zero on an
Yeah,
average
and
day.
there's
It's
no
like, who wants to
there's
fucking live in
no
that shit?
there's no atmosphere. Like, I don't know. It's just bizarre, you know. I mean, at best, it's just this kind of really sad, like juvenile, you know, fantasy, and ironically, you
It's
know, oh,
defeatist too. It says that
we've
basically like
given
we
up on the
lost.
future. Remember, we've given up on the future, and this is my big issue with, you know, Mark Fisher, who mixed bag. He had some interesting ideas. It's like, oh, in search of lost futures. You know, all these people. You know, it's had such an impact on this, you know, mostly millennial cohort of like socialist and socialist adjacent writers. Like, we need, you know, the lost futures of the 20th century. I mean, you know, that's nostalgic.
Yes.
That's retro. That's quote unquote romantic in the way that these people
That
use
might
it.
as well be
This
Michael Moore,
disparaging.
honestly, dude. Like it might as well be like a Michael Moore saying like we could have had like an industrial utopia along the lines of Flint, Michigan in 1955. And it's sort of like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? Like that to me is a really wrong-headed direction.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why you know, that's any less, you know, ridiculous than some neo-pastoralist vision. Oh, but you just want millions of people to die.
It's not
You're
visionary.
advocating a Khmer Rouge sort of situation. I mean, you know, these people, they resort to this kind of this caricature and character assassination. It's so stupid. It's so silly. I don't know. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
you know, having engaged with them in sometimes very ugly ways online for a few years, it's sort of like, you know,
Back in
you
the
know what I mean?
tabernacle. Well, it's good to talk with you. I feel like this Zardoz movie was a was a good direction for you. Honestly, I was honestly it's funny because I was watching your post about Zardoz for a long time on Facebook, and I was like, God, Anthony's just going down the rabbit hole, obsessed with this movie. And then like I see that you wrote a book about it, and I was like so happy.
Oh, do you want to see how, you know, how it happened? You didn't ask. It's like,
Yeah,
you
how
know,
did
it
the
was
book
just,
happen?
it was actually one good thing. It was one of the good things that came out of the pandemic. I found myself in this weird house up, you know, I left New York. I found myself in this weird house in Austerlitz, like on, you know, on the Western Massachusetts border in upstate New York. You know, I had all this uh, time on my hands. I had some money because, you know, I was collecting unemployment. It was that enhanced unemployment. And I don't know, I could just, you know, I didn't have to teach and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to hustle. So, you know, I just, for like, I had about 7 or 8 months and I just was like, you know, I mean, you know, I put this thing together. I was reading like 10, 12 hours a day, and then I was writing. Um, and I don't know. I mean, it's a strange book because, I mean, it's about the movie, sure, but I'm like using the movie as a way of exploring, you know, this effectively this archive, this group of thinkers they call the critical Aquarian, and then I don't know, like. Was a person I know at the New School really helped, this guy named Dominic Petman, who's a professor of media studies, who really kind of encouraged me. And he had like a line of he's put together, he oversees um, an ebook, a line of ebooks, and it was originally going to be that, but he was like, I feel it was too long, and he was like, I feel like you should just pitch it to Repeater, or pitch it to Zero Books. I mean, Zero is now part of Repeater again. It's an imprint of Repeater. And, you know, years ago that you know, I pitched a book to them and they wanted me to do it, but it never happened. So I contacted them and they're like, well, let's see it. And they just looked at us like, yeah, well, we'll publish it. You know, I was like,
You know
you
what
know,
it
because
reminds me
I
of? For
like,
those that want to pick this book up, it's a short little read, and it reminds me of those 33 and a third books that are about like
yeah,
specific albums. I think I have the Neutral Milk Hotel one and a few others. I love those because it's like it's kind of like popular academic in a sense.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
sort of like takes a piece of pop culture and really goes deep in it and like analyzes it, theorizes it. What you've done here with Zardoz is use Zardoz to recover a kind of intellectual tradition that I think puts degrowth in a different perspective than that sort of like, oh, you want to kill everybody by going off of fossil fuels or something. I don't know. It's a sort of attempt to negotiate some kind of balance between all these different impulses. I really enjoyed reading it, and I think that people that listen to this show will enjoy it as well. We shouldn't have 6 or 7 years between episodes. Anthony,
Yeah.
I'd
Well,
love to talk with you again. Yeah.
They want me to do another, or Peter wants me to do another book, like
Nice.
called The Gift of Death, where I would like explore other thinkers like Ursula Le Guin. And I mean, I'd love to do it. And I signed a contract. I mean, the big problem with writing, and this would be a longer book, is just time. And
dude, that's funny, because as I was sitting, oftentimes when I'm talking in during the podcast, and recording podcasts, I'm often thinking to myself, what will be the title of this podcast? And at some point in this conversation in the last hour, I thought the best title would be The Gift of Death.
Yeah, you should do it. You should
what a concept.
Yeah.
Like it's really, really good. And to me, that was like one of the more mind-blowing sort of perspectives that Zardoz shared with me. It was surprising to see that perspective on the commune, honestly. And I really enjoyed it. It's a fucking weird movie, dude. And Sean Connery is super strange in it. But honestly, by the end, he had kind of grown on me. I was sort of like, I was pro Zed at the end.
I have another weird movie for you before you go. Like,
yeah.
This movie, it's like this weird kind of British folk horror movie. It was actually made for the BBC, but it's called Penda's Fen. Penda. Like, Penda is the name of like some, I guess, like old English god, like pre-Christian deity or figure, or not a god. He's actually he's a name of a kind of a pre-Christian monarch, I believe. I don't know, but it's a weird film. You should check it out. It's hard to describe.
Cool. I'm looking it up now. Nice. Well, thank you, Anthony. Good to talk with you. I hope you're doing well, and I hope we talk again soon.
Yeah. All right.
Well, okay, my friends. I think that's going to do it for Nostalgia Trap for today. I want to thank my guest, Anthony Galluzzo. Always great to talk with Anthony. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It always makes me think a lot about where we're at and what we should be doing, etc. Go check out his book. It's called Against the Vortex: Zardoz and Degrowth Utopias in the 70s and Today. Out right now from Zero Utopia Books. I'll put a link in the episode description along with a link to our Patreon page where you can subscribe or just check out a free trial or just go to the page and leave the tab open for a month before you ultimately forget about it. Whatever you want to do with it, I'm okay with it. I hope you have a good holiday. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.